So good morning to everyone, and especially all of you out there in cyberspace who are tuned in either in the real present or in the perceived present. We've been talking about compassion, and at the risk of beating a dead horse, which is the least compassionate thing you could possibly do. I'm just going to go back and meditate. I'm obviously not suited to be talking today. We've been talking about compassion, and we've been talking about how it influences our relationships with others and the world. So to kind of put the frosting on this cake, I want to talk today a little bit about self-compassion, which interestingly enough is again in alignment with Billy's reading. Thank you for tuning in, Billy. About 30 years ago, there was a movement that started. It was called the self-esteem movement. And so sometimes we confuse self-esteem with self-compassion. And they're not the same thing. They're very different. In our culture, we talk about, we always want to be above average, right? I mean, anything you do, you want to be above average, right? If I came into your workplace and said, "You're doing a very average job today," you'd be insulted, right? If you came up to me afterwards and said, "Well, that was a very average talk today, thank you," I'd be wringing my hands. So I got to go back to the drawing board. Nobody wants to be average, but yet everybody wants to be above average, and so that's an absurd concept on its face. Everybody can't, unless you're from Lake Wobegon, everybody can't be above average. Another obscure reference. So when we started the self-esteem movement, it was about encouraging children to feel good about themselves, and that was a wonderful thing. But what ends up happening with that, down that rabbit hole, is we begin to then compare ourselves to others. How am I doing? How am I doing compared to that person? How am I doing compared to that person? Boy, I'm sure glad I'm not them, because they really suck. But gee, I wish I were them, because they have great hair. I mean, when you were in school, remember? That was like the people with great hair. Oh, God. I always wanted to be one of them. So we start comparing ourselves to other people, and so even the whole concept of bullying is really about developing self-esteem. How can I can if I can prove that I'm meaner and tougher than any of the other boys, then I put myself in a place of high self-esteem. So the self-esteem movement has, over the years, developed bullies and narcissists. And we've been tracking, for about the same time that the self-esteem movement has been in the public eye, we've been tracking narcissism. And what we found is, over the last 30 years, narcissism is spiking. It's spiked. It's been a very seriously up-moving curve. And it's interesting how we, as a culture or society, began to reflect our cultural dysfunctions with our political scene. Back in the 1930s, infantile paralysis was a big deal. Polio was an epidemic. And so we elected a president who had polio. Right? And now narcissism is the thing. So, should not be surprised. And narcissism is just that, really focusing so much on how I feel that in every moment, how I feel is not just the most important thing, it's the only important thing. And it is a direct and logical result of the self-esteem movement. Because often self-esteem was placed in a competitive backdrop, competitive milieu, and so it became tainted. Self-compassion is very different. Self-compassion is looking at yourself and recognizing, you know what, I'm not perfect. There's some things I suck at. I'm flawed. I'm human. But I'm whole, perfect, and complete. That's a tricky one. How can I be whole, perfect, and complete if I'm flawed? If I'm human, if I make mistakes, if I do things that I regret? I mean, we all look back and go, you know, have you ever had that conversation with someone and then, 2 days later you're still replaying that conversation in your head? Geez, I wish I would have said. I wish I would have said. Or I wish I would have done. And we're trying to recreate our past to bring it into alignment with our sense of our ideal self. There's, back in the day, back in 3 centuries ago, when I was in university studying psychology, they had a test. It was called the Q-sort. The Q-sort test was a measurement of the gap between my perceived self and my ideal self. And of course, the bigger the gap, the more potential for unhappiness, depression. And so, we have this sense of who we are, and we have this sense of who we'd like to be. And often that gap is a chasm, and it's a chasm we don't see how to overcome, how to bridge. And so we become frustrated. And then that frustration can lead to a downward spiral. Feeling that I'm insufficient in a particular situation actually leads to a triggering of ancient survival biochemistry. When I get into a situation and I feel overwhelmed by it, I feel insufficient to the moment, my adrenals start to fire. Blood goes to the large muscles away from my brain. And all of these survival mechanisms kick in. And then, of course, if that happens over long periods of time, it can lead us to a chronic and state of depression. They're measuring, there's a new generation. It's not the millennials anymore. The new generation. Right? Gen Z is now coming of age, right? And they've been measuring Gen Z, and what they found is, over the millennials, Gen Z has a substantial increase in suicides. So this, again, it's this lack, it's this being in this competition for self-esteem that's not working. Compassion, as we've been talking about, is trying on being you. Walking a mile in your moccasins, imagining what it would be like to have to see the world and experience the world and have the world occur through the filters that you carry. Because none of us experience purely. We all experience subjectively. That's why we could all put on our coats and go for a walk around the block and come back, and if I asked each of you about your experience, you would all agree it was cold, but then you would all have various other variations on what your experience was. Some of you would say, oh, it was exhilarating cold. It made me feel alive. And others would say, yeah, the sun was out, and so I just really drank up that energy. And others would say, it was bitter cold, it stung, it hurt to breathe. But it was the same walk. But we all have different filters and different ways of giving meaning to our experience. We're meaning-making machines. Well, what we do with others, we do with ourselves, and often in the cruelest way. Somebody once told me, they said, and you've heard this before, if you spoke to your friends the way you speak to yourself, you wouldn't have any. And, you know, this is the divine feminine in us, is the ability to nurture. We all have it. We all carry an innate ability to nurture. Now, you could argue that females get it more strongly. We won't go down that rabbit hole. We all have it. We all have the capacity to nurture. And we all have, as we talked about last week, a natural propensity to nurture, especially when we perceive suffering in others. If we come across a wounded animal, a wounded plant, or a wounded human, there is a natural biochemical tendency, a neural tendency to want to help relieve that suffering somehow. And yet, when we look at ourselves and we begin to do this self-assessment, and we find ourselves lacking, how do we nurture ourselves? We say, oh, you know, you failed at this. Do we say, oh, honey, it's okay. You're whole, complete, and perfect. You had a hiccup. It's understandable that test was probably skewed toward people who have different experience than you. You can make up that ground if you want to spend some time applying yourself, and I'll support you in that. How many of us talk to ourselves that way?
Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we have graduate students in the room, so sometimes was the answer. But also, how many of you speak to yourself cruelly at times?
Sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah. I suck. What's wrong with me? What was I thinking? That's my favorite one. Or the one that creeps in that I've really been working on eliminating is F me.
No way.
Yeah, that's awful, isn't it? But I picked it up somewhere, and so now I'm working to, okay, we're going to put that one in its place. So instead, I've replaced that one with whirligig.
Yeah.
And if I can't think of whirligig, then I just go into spiritual Tourette's until I come up with whirligig. So I go, barbiturates, echinacea, whirligig. And just saying, once I get to whirligig, by then I'm whatever negative charge was on that particular thought has thank God, it is dissipated. So, but what about culturing an active practice of self-nurturing? Now, somebody say, well, that's, go back to can you imagine as a 8-year-old or a 10-year-old going to your dad and saying, Dad, I'm developing a practice of self-nurturing. I know what my dad would have said. What the hell's wrong with you? I'll slap that out of you, don't worry. Self-nurturing, that's just selfish. No, selfish is when we don't nurture ourselves, when we don't take care of ourselves, when we don't offer ourselves self-compassion, because then that's when we turn into a monster. When we're a monster to ourselves, guess what happens when we encounter others? They get the reflection of that. So, it's a two-way street. And this is one of the principles the Dalai Lama has Buddhists in general have always stood for, is in the West, we have this slightly skewed vision of compassion, and that it's a one-way street. Compassion can only go out to another person. No, the Buddhists understand very clearly that compassion doesn't work one way. If you can't do it both ways, it's not compassion. It's not working. It's not a whole concept. It's not a whole gift that we have. And it is one of our gifts. The ability to forgive ourselves, to cut ourselves a break, to continually remind ourselves we are whole, perfect, and complete. I am whole, perfect, and complete. Let's hear it. Everybody say that with me. I am whole, perfect, and complete. All right, I want you to say it again, but this time I want you to check in with your body. And when you say it, check in with how your body responds to this. Ready? I am whole, perfect, and complete. Now, some of you, their body might have felt exhilaration. Some of you, the body might have gone, really? I ain't buying it. Well, and either way is fine. Neither way is wrong, but just it's an honest, your body doesn't lie. If you want to know what concepts you're really holding in subconscious, check in with your body. Your body will let you know. So let's try that one more time, and this time with conviction, self-nurturing. I am whole, perfect, and complete. How could it be otherwise? How could it be otherwise? Many years ago, I started down the road of misanthropy. Everybody ever been on Misanthropy Highway? It's a lovely road. Actually, it's an ugly road. It's the road of loathing of humanity, including myself. But usually, the road of misanthropy is a road of narcissism. It's a way of making me feel better about myself. And here's what, some of you have heard me talk about my yoga out there on the highway, driving my car, right? And it's like, these people, how do they get licenses? How do they not understand you can't go on the belt line from the slow lane all the way across to the fast lane without even putting a turn signal on? What's wrong with them? These people are stupid. These people have no business out here driving. They're just wrong. Well, how does that make me feel about myself? I know better. I'm pretty cool. I know enough to do that. So I put myself in a position of superiority out of all these people out there on the highway that I've never even met. That's narcissism. And I recognize the mechanics of that now, so I'm working on it. So I'm trying to turn it into a video game, which may be another narcissistic enterprise, but at least it's more benign narcissism. Yeah, no, the people that do the crazy stuff on the road, those are the people that make the game interesting, right? And if I'm going to navigate, I'm going to dodge, and I don't have anything to fire with. I always wanted a paint gun on my car, so I could, mark the cars. But anyway, just steering clear, finding the holes in the traffic and the nonsense. That's the game. So I found this, again, another mental trick to, once I understood the reality, the inauthenticity of my criticism game, which is just a way I had to make myself feel better about myself. That's that self-esteem game. I can now play the compassion game and go, they're all just players in my game. We're all in this together. They're doing this for my benefit. Bless their hearts. And I deserve a little blessing because I'm whole, perfect, and complete. When I can truly feel whole, perfect, and complete, even though I understand that I do things that I regret later, that I go, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Or next time this happens, I'm going to do my best to do this instead, to say this instead, to feel this instead, to think this instead. That's self-development. That's okay. That's what we're here for. But we have to do it with a sense of kindness. Imagine if you, and maybe some of you who, especially those who went to Catholic school, may have this experience of being, a fourth grader and having a teacher berate you. Anybody ever have that experience of having a teacher berate you? Yeah, and so that felt awful. So we're in the school of life. We're in the school of humanity here. We're spirit. Spirit's unfettered. Spirit is unrestricted. Spirit has no agenda. Spirit is free, safe, has everything it needs. But now we've been crammed into this meat suit and stuck into this dimensional place with friction and resistance and gravity and all of that time and necessity. And so we're learning how to navigate. We're in school. And so our soul is our teacher. And the soul will always speak kindly. The soul always whispers kindly. It may say things we don't want to hear, but it whispers kindly. So when we hear the voice of, I suck, what is wrong with me? I'm just not good at this. That's not the soul. That's the ego mind. The ego mind is great at feeding on itself. The ego mind is that wonderful quality of human nature that will go, there's ice cream in the refrigerator. It's calling my name. No, I'm on a diet. But the ice cream is in the refrigerator. I'll just have a little. Go on, you deserve it. You deserve some ice cream. You worked hard today. All right, go out and get the ice cream and eat the whole pint. You miserable cretin. You are so weak. You ate all of that ice cream. You're supposed to be on a diet. That's the same voice. Some people call that Satan. It's just the ego mind. It's what it does. It's how it operates. So recognize that voice and recognize the difference between that voice and the divine voice, which is always speaking, but it whispers. The ego voice often screams, yells, shouts, speaks loudly, speaks boldly. So it drowns out the divine mind. But when we engage in a conscious practice of self-compassion, of understanding, and by the way, when this bit where I told you I went down the road of misanthropy, if you don't go too far down that road, here's what I discovered down the road of misanthropy. The humans are messed up. Humans are just messed up. Time for another flood. It's just a flawed species. Well, you don't get too far down that road, if you're logical at all, until it occurs to you that perhaps it's a design flaw. If all humans are messed up, then it's a design flaw. And bring me the design engineer. I have some things to talk to them about. Well, then it's like, really? So the creator of the universe created this magnificent universe, which is elegant in so many ways, and yet made one huge mistake called humans. It became impossible for me to swallow. And so that's what kind of turned me around at that point. I'm going, well, that road leads to nowhere. That road leads to absurdity. So if we are truly the product of divine ingenuity, then we are not flawed. Even when we do stuff that we regret, when we do stuff that makes us cringe, we understand that this is part of the way things get done here in this plane of existence. Trial and error. That's how we learn. We have all been, in multiple lifetimes, we've all been all of it. We've been victim, we've been predator, we've been hero and heroine, we've been male and female, we've been undecided, we've been tyrants, we've been peasants, we've been all of it. So when we go blaming others or blaming ourselves, it's a fool's game, it's a fool's enterprise. Because the system is perfect. We don't see the whole system. We only see one tiny little piece of it. It's like having a masterpiece painting, 8 feet by 12 feet on the wall, and all of it masked off except one tiny corner. And we're asked to judge the painting. Can't do it. But that's what we see typically in a day-to-day mundane experience, is we see one tiny little segment of the tree that's in front of us. We don't even realize most of the time that we're in a forest. All we're seeing is, oh, there's moss, and there's a gouge in the bark. This is awful. We don't see the elegance of the forest, the 20,000-foot view. So by initiating a practice of self-compassion, learning to be nurturing to yourself, learning to speak to yourself the way you would speak to a 3-year-old child. Because that's what your ego is, basically. Learning how to speak to a 3-year-old child. You would not do it harshly. You would do it lovingly. You may need to redirect it. You may need to give it direction it doesn't necessarily want to receive, but that doesn't mean you have to be cruel, harsh, or judgmental. It just means you, as the parent, offer support for that child to become more aware in the next moment than it was in this moment. That's functional parenting. And so what works for the child works for you. What would you say to yourself right now to make you more alive, more conscious, more highly functioning in the next moment than you are in this moment?
I love you.
Pardon me?
I love you.
I love you. That's a good place to start. Oh? I love me? That sounds solipsistic, narcissistic. I love me. Not so much, because here again, we come back to the same thing we always come back to. Who are you? What's your point of identification? If your point of identification is the personality, that's going to be hard to love all the time. Because that sucker does do strange stuff. You know? Gene does things that not always appropriate. So, understanding that it's like a double-edged sword here. It's understanding that Gene as a personality is going to stagger all over the road. Going to do good things, going to do not so good things, and everything in between. But keeping the focus on who I am, the I am that is observing Gene's experience, that's inviolable. That doesn't even require forgiving. That's a place of spiritual ecstasy. Being in the identification and understanding and experience of the true I am self is ecstatic. There is no criticism there. But it begins with giving the personality a break, giving the ego mind a break. Don't speak to it as if it were some sage that's doing evil stuff just to do evil. That's generally speaking not true of anyone, least of all you. If you're in this room today, or if you're sitting through this drivel at home, you are already in a state where you got to start cutting yourself a break, because you're doing the work, whether you give yourself credit for it or not. And the work that you do, forgiving yourself, the work that you do, offering compassion to yourself, will automatically be reflected out into the world and to the people whom you encounter. And so, you will make the world a better place, immediately a better place, by being kinder to yourself. That's the way it works. And you will not be in a state of fight or flight. Your adrenals will not be firing. You'll be in peak state. You'll actually be more capable of functioning in the world as a person who nurtures themselves as opposed to a person who criticizes themselves. Now, that's counterintuitive, because we were taught self-criticism is the way to perfection. And perfection is the way to be potent in the world. And it's just the exact opposite of that. That kind of thinking weakens us. Self-nurturing, the ability to be compassionate with ourselves, to be in the understanding that we are each doing the very best we can in each moment, given the level of consciousness we are at that moment. How could I have done anything differently? You know, it's easy to look back on our past and go, if only I had done this instead. Or if only I had not done that. If only I hadn't said that. If only I hadn't been in that place. If only I hadn't decided to go there. If only I hadn't decided to talk to that person. If we could go back 100,000 ways and reprogram our lives. And in some parallel universe, we're living out that life with those choices being different. But in this particular experience, we couldn't have made any other choices. It's really impossible for us to have made any choices other than the ones we made. Because most of them were not made with consciousness. Most of them were reactive. Most of them were programs running.
No way.
So, give yourself a break. You were just running programs. But now you know that. So the ante has been upped. But still, it does not serve you to sit there and vilify yourself. Nurturing, self-nurturing. Develop a conscious and consistent practice of self-nurturing. I am. You don't even have to say, I am beautiful, I am good, I am any of that. I am. If you focus on the practice of I am, the rest takes care of itself. Self-nurturing is the natural state of awareness because the self is a miracle. The self is an expression of divinity. It is no more and no less. And in that awareness, self-compassion is an automatic part of the deal. Keep coming back to the truth of who you are and keep coming back to a practice of being mindful of the illusion about yourself and your experience that you are constantly creating. And you're creating it based on patterns that go back generations. And so, forgive yourself. Forgive your parents. Forgive your grandparents. Forgive your great-grandparents. And when you do the work of self-nurturing and self-realization, you are healing those generations backward and forward. That's how important this work is. It goes way beyond you. It goes backwards and forwards to the generations. It goes outward to all of your encounters in the world. That's how important the work is. So the next time you pick up the voice of self-deprecation, bless its pointy little head. I like to pick it up, imagine it, picking it up and going, honey, I understand you're upset, and that's okay. Give it a little rock. Say, but this is big boy stuff. We got this. Just the very act of speaking in that tone transforms your whole level of awareness at that point. And then you can, because that's I am. That's the voice of compassion. That's the voice of divine, unconditional love, because that's the nature of the divine. And in that state of loving kindness toward ourselves, we radiate loving kindness out to our world. Doesn't get any better than that. So thank you and good night, Mrs. Dratkin, wherever you are.